There is a price point in the watch world where your money goes to die. It's not the entry level or the ultra-luxury market. It's the $8,000 bracket, and no one wants them. Some of these watches are historically significant. Some carry case architectures unchanged for 40 years. Some are finished to a standard most people will never own at any price. But none of that matters. Today, we are going to break down exactly why people run away from these watches. This is the only analysis you need of the $8,000 watch market. The market is splitting, and the middle is losing. Before we name watches or brands, you need to understand the picture, because without it, the individual brand stories look like bad luck. And this is not bad luck, this is architecture. The watch market coming out of its 2022 speculative peak has not recovered evenly, not even close. According to the Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult 9th Annual Swiss Watcher Report, published February 2026 and covering 2025 performance, watches priced above 50,000 Swiss francs represented 89% of total growth in the entire Swiss watch industry last year, despite making up only 1.4% of the total volume of watches actually sold. Pause on that. 1.4% of all the watches that left a Swiss factory in 2025 generated nearly all of the industry's revenue growth. The ultra-luxury end of the market is structurally insulated from everything we are about to describe. Richard Mille is fine. Patek Philippe is fine. The makers of watches that cost as much as a house in a mid-sized city do not need to worry about the dynamics in this video. The bottom end is also doing something interesting. Swiss export data from late 2025 showed total industry volume contracting by 10.9%, but the one price segment that actually grew was watches priced between 200 Swiss francs and 500 Swiss francs. Tissot PRX territory. The people who used to stretch for an $8,000 aspirational piece are not going up, they are going down. They are landing on honest, practical, over-delivering watches and telling the mid-tier to sort itself out. And the middle, the bracket where aspirational luxury used to live, the watches that were supposed to represent arrival at a certain point in life, the $5,000 to $1,000 to $10,000 to $1,000 range that once accounted for the majority of what watch boutiques actually sold, that is where the industry is bleeding. WatchChart's secondary market data shows that by Q2 2025, prices across the broader watch market had fallen for 13 consecutive quarters. That's not a correction or a temporary readjustment after the COVID-era speculative frenzy. That was planned and deliberate. And the damage is not distributed evenly, even within that correction. Excluding Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet, the average watch now trades on the secondary market at minus 31% or worse relative to its retail price, 31% below retail, on average. For every watch that is not made by those three brands, that is not a dip. That is a structural repricing of what most luxury watches are actually worth versus what their marketing budgets have been claiming they are worth. And the $8,000 bracket is where the repricing is most violent, because it is the tier that has the furthest to fall between what it charges and what it can actually deliver. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 3 real brands. 3 real verdicts. The lazy version of this analysis talks about anonymous archetypes. The conglomerate-owned chronograph. The lifestyle diver with a celebrity ambassador. The dress watch with a movement that is really just a modified industrial engine with a fancy rotor on top. We are not doing that. Because the moment you name real brands and cite real reference numbers, the conversation changes. You can no longer be dismissed. The data either holds or it does not. Here are 3 real brands with real numbers in the real market as of May 2026. IWC Schaffhausen. IWC Schaffhausen is a legitimate watchmaking house. Let us be clear about that before anything else. Founded in 1868 by a Boston watchmaker named Florentine Ariosto Jones. Jones was an American who chose Schaffhausen for the Rhine Falls water power needed to run precision manufacturing before electricity. And with the explicit intention of combining American industrial methods with Swiss craft, IWC built genuine engineering heritage across 150 years. The Portugueser, introduced in 1939 at the request of two Portuguese merchants who wanted a wristwatch with the precision of a marine chronometer, is one of the most referenced and most imitated dress watch designs in the history of the form. The Big Pilot has a legitimate aviation heritage that reads as genuine rather than constructed. These are not trivial achievements. IWC sits today in the Richemont Group, alongside Cartier, Vacheron Constantin, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Panerai, A. Lange and Zone, and Piaget. It is the brand that a certain type of collector discovers in their mid-30s as a considered alternative to Rolex, which is precisely the positioning that makes the following data so uncomfortable. In 2018, IWC was selling 198,000 watches per year, at an average retail price of almost 9,000 Swiss francs. That is a company generating serious revenue, operating at scale, with a real collector following across multiple continents. By 2025, those numbers had fundamentally changed. IWC was selling 118,000 watches, a reduction of 80,000 units, or roughly 40% of their volume. And the average price per watch had collapsed from 9,000 Swiss francs to 4,432 Swiss francs. The brand was selling significantly fewer watches for significantly less money per watch. To understand what that means in practical terms, look at a specific reference. The IWC Portugueser chronograph reference 371605 with the steel silver dial is the authentic representative of the collection. It is the watch that a serious buyer would actually consider and carries a current retail price of $8,900 in the United States. Its secondary market value, as tracked by watch charts with live transaction data through to May 2026, sits at approximately $5,026. That is a 43.5% discount to retail. Not a theoretical number, not a worst-case projection. The actual price that actual buyers are paying for this watch in the real market after the advertising has been turned off and the display case lighting has been switched on in someone's living room instead. You buy it at $8,900. You try to sell it. You get $5,026. That $3,874 difference is what the brand's marketing is worth, minus what the watch is worth. Those are not the same number. And the broader corporate picture confirms everything the individual reference data suggests. Richemont's Specialist Watchmakers Division, the corporate umbrella that covers IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Panerai, Vacheron Constantin, and A. Lange and Söhne, reported a 13% revenue decline for the financial year ended March 2025. Revenues fell to €3.28 billion, with an operating result of €175 million. A luxury goods division generating a 5.3% operating margin is not a healthy luxury goods division. That is a division under structural pressure, and that pressure is visible at the reference level, in the gap between $8,900 and $5,000 and $26. Panerai is an Italian icon in a way that almost no other watch brand manages to be. The Luminore's crown-protecting bridge is a functional mechanism developed for Italian Navy frogmen, not a design decision, but an operational requirement. The cushion case, the sandwich dial, the proportions that sit completely outside mainstream Swiss design language, these are codes Panerai developed through genuine need, not a marketing committee, and they have never been successfully replicated. But none of that changes the numbers. Over the last 8 years, Panerai's annual production volume has been halved, from 76,500 units down to 38,000. That is a brand that has lost more than half its productive scale. And simultaneously, as the brand tried to manage the revenue decline, the average price per watch dropped from 12,800 Swiss francs to 10,900 Swiss francs. meaning they were chasing volume with pricing concessions that signaled to the market that the original retail prices had never been fully justified by real demand. When you go to the secondary market today, you can purchase a Panerai Luminor Marina, full set, box and papers, recent production, one of the core references in the collection, for under $4,000. Many are listed between $3,500 and $3,900, with completed sales confirming these prices. The retail price on those same references at an authorized dealer sits between $7,500 and $9,500 depending on configuration. Grey market dealers in the UK, which represents one of the more transparent and competitive pre-owned markets in the world, are openly advertising Panerai references at 10% to 30%. Below retail price as a standard starting point, not a deep discount, not a distress sale. The normal price of a Panerai bought from a grey market dealer is 10% to 30% below what the authorized dealer is asking. That is the market's honest assessment of the brand's retail premium. The brand is not recovering. It is recalibrating to a lower equilibrium. And every collector who bought at full retail during that journey has been funding the recalibration. Vacheron Constantin. Before discussing Vacheron, one clarification. Vacheron is not an $8,000 brand. Their overseas collection starts significantly above that. Including them here would be misleading if the intention were to place them as direct competitors at this price. The reason Vacheron belongs in this script is different, and arguably more important than anything we have cited so far. Because what is happening to Vacheron proves that the crisis affecting IWC, Panerai, and every conglomerate-owned watch at the $8,000 mark is not tier-specific. It is structural. And it has now climbed far enough up the price ladder to reach a brand founded in 1755, with 270 years of continuous operation. According to WatchChart's market tracking, Vacheron Constantin has become the first brand in their entire monitored universe to hit a value retention rate below -40%. Vacheron Constantin, the oldest watch manufacturer on Earth with an uninterrupted history since its founding, a claim no other watchmaker can match. Founded in 1755, it has outlasted wars, revolutions, 2 centuries of monetary upheaval, and the complete transformation of the global watch industry from pocket watches to quartz to mechanical revival. A brand whose entry overseas retails at a price point that would make this script's central thesis look conservative, trading at 60 cents on the retail dollar. The Morgan Stanley data is careful to note that the overseas collection specifically holds up better than the rest of the Vacheron range. It is the broader portfolio that is dragging the brand's value retention below the portfolio -40% threshold. But the headline number is still the headline. When a brand of that pedigree and that positioning cannot escape the structural repricing that is revaluing mid-tier luxury watches, the brands sitting at $8,000 with a fraction of the heritage and a multiple of the volume have no legitimate claim to immunity. The data has no exceptions for famous names. It only makes exceptions for brands that control production so tightly that supply never meets demand. Vacheron does not have that, and at the $8,000 level, neither does anyone else. The 3 structural reasons this is happening. Individual brand performance tells you what is happening. The structural analysis tells you why. And the why matters enormously, because it determines whether this is a cycle that will correct or a permanent repricing that the industry has to accept. The answer is closer to the latter. Here are the 3 reasons. Reason 1. The conglomerate production trap. IWC, Panerai, Tag Heuer, Hublot, Zenith, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Omega, these are all brands operating inside publicly listed corporate groups. Richemont is listed in Zurich. LVMH is listed in Paris. Swatch Group is listed in Zurich. They all answer to shareholders. They all have quarterly earnings calls. They all carry production infrastructure, factories, equipment, trained craftspeople, supply chains, that represents fixed costs, which must be covered by revenue volume. An independent watchmaker producing 6,000 watches per year has the structural ability to create genuine scarcity. To say no, to allocate, to build, waitlists. To manufacture the perception, and often the reality, that demand exceeds supply at every price point they choose. The conglomerate-owned brand producing 80,000 to 200,000 watches per year does not have that option. Not because they lack the desire to create scarcity, but because their cost structure requires revenue that only scale can generate. You cannot cover the fixed costs of a major Swiss manufacturing facility by making 8,000 watches. And here is the trap the conglomerates cannot escape. Overproduction relative to authentic demand feeds surplus into the gray market, which then functions as a permanent price anchor below retail. When gray market channels offer your watch at 20 to 30% below retail as a standard transaction, not a distressed sale, but the normal everyday price for your current production model, your authorized dealers start losing sales. They reduce orders. Your perceived value drops. The secondary market follows. Gray market prices fall further. The cycle accelerates. This is not a strategic error by IWC or Panerai or Tag Heuer individually. This is the structural mathematics of being a watch brand inside a publicly listed group that must balance unit economics, production capacity, and shareholder returns simultaneously. The brands that solve this, Rolex, above all, solved it decades ago through distribution and production discipline the conglomerates have proven unwilling or unable to replicate. Reason 2. The psychological pincer is tighter than it has ever been. The buyer who might have spent $8,000 on an IWC Portugieser in 2019 or 2020 now exists inside a decision landscape that has fundamentally changed in their favor, which is to say, against the $8,000 mid-tier. From below, the pressure has become intense. The $3,000 to $5,000 category has been the site of more genuine watchmaking innovation per dollar in the last 5 years than any other tier in the market. Tudor's Black Bay family has built a secondary market profile that holds value with unusual stability for a non-Big Three brand. The Tudor Black Bay 58 is clean, proportionally excellent, historically grounded, and liquid. You can sell one without waiting 3 weeks for a buyer who has never heard of it. Grand Seiko, in the $3,000 to $6,000 range, represents perhaps the most powerful counter-argument to mid-tier Swiss luxury that has ever existed. Grand Seiko's case finishing routinely shames European competitors at twice the price. The spring drive movement, a hybrid using a mechanical mainspring regulated by a quartz oscillator to achieve accuracy within plus or minus 0.5 seconds per day, is a genuinely original engineering achievement that no other brand makes. Their seasonal dials, produced across 2 distinct Japanese workshops, Studio Shizukuishi in Iwate and the Shinshu Watch Studio in Nagano, where many of the most celebrated textural dials originate, are craft objects. You are not buying a status symbol with Grand Seiko. You are buying watchmaking. But here is what is equally true. Grand Seiko's average value retention sits at minus 38.1%, according to watch charts. The secondary market punishes them not because the watches lack quality, but because brand recognition drives secondary liquidity, and Grand Seiko's global recognition is a fraction of Rolex's. The market is telling you something true about the difference between watchmaking quality and brand equity as a resale currency. Both are real. They are not the same. From above, the pressure is equally powerful and now more precisely quantifiable than it has ever been. The Rolex Submariner crossed into 5-figure retail territory on the 1st of January 2026. The no-date Submariner reference 124060, which carried a retail price of $9,500 in 2025, became a $10,050 watch at the start of the year. The Submariner date reference 126610LN now sits at $11,350, up over $1,000 from its previous retail price. These increases are driven by a combination of tariffs on Swiss watch imports to the United States, rising gold costs affecting precious metal models, and the continuing strength of the Swiss franc relative to the dollar. This means the collector standing in front of an $8,000 IWC Portugieser chronograph is now looking at a watch that will lose roughly $3,900 the moment they walk out of the store. And they are doing so with the knowledge that for $2,000 to $3,000 more, they could own a Submariner, a watch that the entire global market has agreed on. A watch that second-hand buyers will recognize, want, and purchase without needing to be educated about what they are looking at. Most rational buyers are choosing the second option. And that decision replicated across millions of potential buyers who are now more informed about secondary market values than any watch-buying population in history, is emptying the dealer cases at the $8,000 mark. Not because the watches in those cases are bad, because the decision have turned decisively against them. Reason 3. The aspirational buyer has largely exited the primary market. This is the element that was most significantly underweighted in the original framing of this topic, and it is the one that changes the long-term prognosis from challenging to structurally broken. The watch market's aspirational middle class. The person in their late 30s or early 40s who has reached a point of financial stability and wants a watch that signals something about where they have arrived in life. They could stretch to $6,000 or $8,000 for a piece from a brand with genuine heritage and a story worth telling. That buyer is structurally impaired right now. Two interlocking forces explain it. First, the cost of living pressure that followed the post-COVID inflation cycle has been more persistent and more concentrated among exactly the demographic that used to be the core customer for mid-tier luxury watches. Consumer surveys from 2026 show that 42% of U.S. consumers cite rising prices as the most important problem they face. And wages have barely kept pace, with cumulative price increases since 2021 slightly outpacing wage growth across most sectors. The person who used to have $8,000 available for a discretionary luxury purchase is still earning a salary, but more of it is going to groceries, housing, and debt service. Second, and more structurally significant, that aspirational buyer has been permanently educated by the watch market bubble of 2020 to 2022 and its deflation. The buyer in 2019 walked into an authorized dealer without easy access to real-time secondary pricing. They could not check on their phone exactly what the watch was trading for on Chrono24 before signing the credit card slip. That information asymmetry no longer exists. The 2026 buyer knows, before entering the boutique, that the IWC Portuguese chronograph they are about to pay $8,900 for is currently trading on the secondary market for $5,026. The platforms that track this data are freely accessible and widely cited by the same YouTube channels and Instagram accounts the brands rely on to reach this demographic. The retail premium cannot survive that transparency indefinitely. Swiss export data from November 2025 confirms the behavioral shift. Total volume contracted by 10.9% across the industry. The only price segment that grew was 200 to 500 Swiss francs. The aspirational buyer did not upgrade. They went down and over-delivered in the process, finding that a Tissot PRX or a Seiko Presage gave them a genuine quality watch for a fraction of the price that the mid-tier was asking. One senior executive at a major US-based pre-owned watch dealer summarized it precisely. The pre-owned market is now the best option for value and immediate availability. No import headaches, no sticker shock, no retail premium for the privilege of being the first person to breathe on it. The authorized dealer's footfall has not recovered because the aspirational buyer has rerouted to a more rational destination. The $8,000 retail price is waiting for a customer who has collectively decided they would rather spend that money somewhere the mathematics makes more sense. Section 4. The honest counter-argument. Any forensic analysis that reaches only the conclusion it started looking for is not forensic analysis. It is confirmation bias with footnotes. So here is where the case against the $8,000 tier becomes more nuanced, because the data demands it. The $8,000 bracket is not uniformly dead. There are two categories that exist within it and operate by meaningfully different rules. The first is the genuine independent proposition, not FP. Journe, which starts at $30,000 and above, a brand that sells entry pieces at prices that would make this script's central thesis look conservative, not H. Moser and CE at the higher end of their range. The accessible independents who make genuinely limited quantities of mechanically serious watches at the upper end of the $5,000 to $8,000 tier. Nomos Glashütte, whose in-house swing system escapement is a real piece of engineering at a price that shames the conglomerates. Or Oris, which operates with full ownership and real production discipline, tell a different story. The Morgan Stanley report specifically identified high-end independents as among the few genuine bright spots in the Swiss industry. The structural argument in this script targets conglomerate-owned brands with volume obligations and gray market overflow problems. A watch made in genuinely limited numbers by a brand that can honestly say they do not make enough to satisfy demand is operating in a different economics entirely. The second exception is Grand Seiko. The brand's average value retention of -38% would normally make them an exhibit in the prosecution rather than a witness for the defense. But Grand Seiko's value proposition has to be assessed differently than IWC or Panerais because they are not trying to compete on brand recognition and never have been. Grand Seiko sells you watchmaking. The Zero Door and Zaratsu polished finishing on their cases is objectively superior to what most Swiss brands produce at twice the price. The spring drive is a genuinely original technical achievement. The seasonal dials are art objects. The depreciation is real, and the buyer should understand it. But the depreciation is the cost of access to craft that simply does not exist at this price in any other watchmaking tradition. When you buy a Grand Seiko, you are paying for something real. The market's refusal to price it for resale liquidity is a comment on global brand recognition, not on the quality of the object. The watches that are dying at $8,000 are the conglomerate pieces where the retail price is structurally unsustainable relative to the mechanical and material reality inside the case. Where the $8,900 sticker reflects the cost of the marketing budget, the AD network, the ambassador contract, and the group's overhead allocation, not the cost of what is actually in the watch. That is a precise diagnosis. Not a general condemnation of every watch that happens to retail in this price range. Section 5. The secondary market is now the real market. There is a final structural point that changes the framework for any intelligent buyer approaching this tier. The global secondary watch market reached $16.73 billion in total transaction value during 2025. That represents 36.4% year-on-year growth. The secondary market grew by 36% in a single year, while the primary retail market contracted. The secondary market is not the alternative to the watch market. In terms of growth, in terms of price discovery, and increasingly in terms of volume, the secondary market is the watch market. Dealer pre-owned sales drove $15.65 billion of that total, up 38.3% from 2024. Rolex's own certified pre-owned program hit approximately $590 million in 2025, a 204% increase from the prior year. That is, Rolex itself acknowledging that the secondary channel is not a competitor to their retail business. It is a structural feature of how watches are bought and sold, and a brand of Rolex's sophistication does not build infrastructure for something it expects to disappear. The implications for the 8,000 tier buyer are direct. If you want an IWC Portuguese or chronograph, the correct entry point in 2026 is not $8,900 at an authorized dealer. It is the $5,026 the secondary market is asking after the first buyer absorbed the depreciation hit on your behalf. Same movement, same case, same dial, same bracelet. What you forfeit is being the first to open the box, and the market has priced that experience at $3,874. If it is worth it to you, spend the $8,900. If it is not, the secondary market is fully functional, well-priced, and increasingly backed by authentication guarantees that have removed most of the risk of buying pre-owned. The $8,000 retail price is not a transaction the market is endorsing. It is a fiction maintained by marketing budgets, boutique lighting, and the AD agreement that used to benefit from an information gap. That gap has now closed. The secondary market is the permanent, honest, continuous referendum on what watches are actually worth. And for 3 years, that referendum has returned the same verdict on the conglomerate-owned mid-tier: buy below, buy above, buy pre-owned, or wait. But do not hand over full retail for something the entire market has already told you it will not recognize at that price. Here is where we land. I know, this one was a bit of a doozy, but by now you should know watches that are not absolutely worth your time. But this wouldn't be complete if I don't know what watches you thought would be good for you, but this video has changed your mind on. Let know those watches in the comments. Like this video and subscribe.